Japanese have attacked Pearl Harbor by air.
Ask not what your country can do.
Kennedy has been shot.
One small step for man.
These truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal.
Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
London, September 1940.
Hello, America. This is Edward Murrow speaking from London. There were more German planes over the coast of Britain today than at any time since the war began.
Adolf Hitler was determined to crush the last stronghold in Europe against Nazi Germany. His strategy: bomb England cities and people. During the autumn of 1940, German bombers attacked London night after night for 76 consecutive nights. It came to be known as the Blitz.
"20 acres of London was on fire." It's quite a thought, isn't it? A lot of people were killed, a lot of civilians were killed. Because the Germans were determined to bring us to our knees, you see, at all costs.
By the night of September the 14th, when my daughter was born, the docks were alight, London was ablaze. And in fact, the midwife opened the curtains because we got more bright light from London burning than we got from the electric light in the middle of the room.
Throughout England, 43,000 people died. But the British never gave in. In the Second World War of this century, 50 million people would die, nearly half of them civilians. They would die not because they lived near military targets, but because they were the target. In the First World War, in violation of a long-established principle of civilized combat, Allied blockades of German ports and sporadic German bombing of Paris and London had extended the battlefront to the home front. But civilian casualties were limited. In the Second World War, the distinction between soldiers and civilians would collapse. Now anyone who contributed to the enemy's war-making capacity would be vulnerable, and entire populations would be deliberately targeted because of their race and their religion. This was total war, made more lethal by the advance of technological power and pursued ultimately by forces on both sides. Pablo Picasso's Guernica is considered one of the masterpieces of 20th century art. It portrays the horror that consumed a Spanish town on April the 26, 1937. German bombers and fighters sent by Adolf Hitler to help the fascists in the Spanish Civil War slaughtered 1,600 innocent civilians. There were no military targets of significance in Guernica. An outraged world condemned the attack as the immoral act of a rearmed Germany eager to test its new power. But Guernica was only the prologue to Nazi Germany's campaign in Europe. Poland, September the 1st, 1939.
I was 10 years old. I was playing with my friend in the woods.
were picking mushrooms, and we heard this tremendous noise. The trees started bending, and we saw these huge planes with the black markers. I knew that the war had started.
In 25 days, German armies overran Poland. In 9 months, virtually all of Western Europe. Adolf Hitler's objective was Lebensraum, living space vast enough for a new German empire, the Third Reich.
We thought it was great, something which no one had really experienced before, to go to an occupied country as a soldier. You are the master of that country, you believe.
Hitler's goal was to enslave the Slavic people of Eastern Europe, a people he regarded as racially inferior. In Poland, his commanders ordered executions of the nobility, government officials, priests, and teachers.
Nobody expected that the war would be against civilians. I saw my family and my friends and on a daily basis being murdered on the streets and shot. They made it very clear that we were slaves and we were below a human being, as they call us, Untermensch.
At the very bottom of Hitler's racial scale were Poland's 3 million Jews.
They used to stop elderly men who had beards and yank the beards by the roots. They made them lick their boots, and also immediately all businesses were taken away. We had to wear the yellow Star of David on the front and back of our clothing so that we would be easily recognizable.
Poland's Jews were torn from their homes and banished to ghettos. The largest was in Warsaw. Nearly 500,000 people were crammed into an area where 50,000 had once lived. And the ghetto was sealed.
People were starving and dying of hunger. You also began to see a lot of orphans, bedraggled children. Typhus was rampant. Tuberculosis was rampant. When people died, they were put out on the street, and all the identification was taken away from them, because then the family could get their ration and maybe exist a day longer. It was a horrible situation. be surprised to what you can get used to.
Our human life was nothing for them. It was unworthy of living. I remember German soldiers photographing themselves to show, look at this, they are the strong, beautiful officers. Look, this is the Jews.
In June 1941, Hitler launched his ultimate battle for the vast Lebensraum of the Soviet Union.
The attack on the Soviet Union is a war for territory, but it is also an ideological crusade to destroy communism. It is also a racial crusade to destroy the largest demographic concentration of Jews in the world. So this war has too many temptations for Hitler.
The Soviet army was caught unprepared. In only 2 months, German forces penetrated 500 miles. When they encircled the old capital, Leningrad, Hitler ordered his commanders to wipe the city and its 3 million people off the face of the earth. No surrender would be accepted, even if offered. Bombed and shelled daily, civilians helped defend the city by digging trenches and building shelters. But they faced another enemy, the coldest winter in 30 years. There was no light, no heat, no fuel, no food.
We received 125 grams of bread. Bread made of I don't know what, but not flour. It was so delicious for us. So we divided that small piece into 3 parts.
Zena Generalova was trying to keep her 3-month-old baby alive.
Once a woman told me, "What are you doing? Your child will die, so give all the food to your husband and save husband."
That winter, the people of Leningrad found a slender lifeline. Nearby Lake Ladoga froze, enabling convoys of food and supplies to come in across the ice on makeshift rail lines. The same route allowed people to escape. Zena Generalova tried to leave with her family.
My husband, he was already so blue, so thin, well, you cannot imagine. And the baby did not cry. And in the 4th day, she died in the carriage. He died at the hospital. So I did not save my family and was alone.
Half of Leningrad's population perished during the siege, but the city never surrendered. The Russians held out for 3 winters, 900 days.
People say, "Oh, you see, such terrible things are forgotten with time." No, that cannot be forgotten. Never.
German generals had been instructed by Hitler to wage the Soviet campaign with, as he put it, unmerciful, unrelenting harshness. The German army became the instrument of ideological and racial warfare. Every street, shop, and home became a battlefield, even though in some places, German forces were at first welcomed by civilians as liberators from Stalin's oppression.
And I was billeted in a house, and there was a girl called Anna. And I was young, 19 years old. And I fell in love with Anna. But the thought was they're second-rate human beings, Untermenschen. But to me, Anna was not only beautiful, she was a valuable human being. There was confusion, utter confusion in my mind. What was going on? What, you know, I want to destroy everything. We want to be their masters. It was unconsciously the beginning of the realization that I was involved in something horrible.
The advancing armies were followed by specially trained killing squads, the Einsatzgruppen. As they swept into the conquered territories, their mission was extermination of communist officials and all Jews.
They are given a series of speeches that you are to move in, be ruthless, be tough, we are the master race. This is a preemptive strike, that you were to kill those who have a potential to be a danger to the German occupation.
The first thing they did was to give an order that all men, all Jewish men, between 16 and 60, should report to the center of town. And then later on, I heard shots. .400 they shot that day. Their job was to come in and do what they did, and go to the next town and do the same thing.
In less than 6 months, the Einsatzgruppen systematically hunted down and murdered more than 1 million Soviet Jews. But shooting Jews one at a time was inefficient and psychologically taxing for the killers. In August 1941, Heinrich Himmler, senior commander of the killing squads, went to the Soviet Union and saw firsthand how seriously the executions had demoralized his men. He urged them to find a better method. January 1942, 15 Nazi officials assembled at a villa in an affluent Berlin suburb. Their purpose, to organize what they delicately called the final solution to the Jewish problem. Their plan to eliminate all European Jews, 11 million they estimated. The final solution, an expansion of what the Einsatzgruppen had already begun in the Soviet Union, would now be carried out by Heinrich Himmler's SS. The SS was ruthlessly efficient. All over occupied Europe, the roundup of Jews began. In July, the SS turned its attention to the Warsaw Ghetto.
They told us that they are taking us to the east, where we will be working. Every person which came to the train got a big loaf of bread and marmalade, and some people couldn't stand the hunger anymore and went for that piece of bread.
Then we got suspicious because a large number of people were disappearing and nothing was heard from them. And the trains kept coming back so quickly. The rumors were saying that they were going to be locked into camps and sometimes killed.
That summer, 300,000 Jews were deported from the Warsaw Ghetto. In April 1943, those left in the ghetto fought back. For a few days, using stolen guns and Molotov cocktails, they held off the well-armed Germans.
At that time, I belonged to the underground. It was very difficult, very hard. we knew that death waited for us on every corner.
I doubt that there was any place on this earth an act of heroism like we witnessed in the ghetto. Bedraggled people after 4 years almost of occupation, starved people, people locked within a very, very narrow perimeter. And yet they went against a German army, which at that time was still very victorious and very strong.
We fought, not because we knew that we're going to win, but we also would like to make a statement.
The uprising lasted a month, and then the German troops burned the ghetto block by block. Survivors were killed on the spot or sent to concentration camps. Nazi Germany's killing machine was a highly organized and efficient system, set up with the cooperation of both government and private institutions. Jewish birth records were collected. Post offices delivered the deportation notices. The finance ministry confiscated Jewish property. Private companies took over Jewish businesses. The foreign ministry negotiated for the deportation of Jews outside the Reich. The 6 largest of 30 death camps were all in Poland, situated along rail lines for easy access. On Hitler's personal orders, German railways gave priority to transporting Jews to the camps, even holding up military supplies badly needed on the Eastern Front. From Oslo, Paris, Rome, Amsterdam, trains 100 cars long converged on the Polish heartland. Sealed into boxcars were victims by the tens of thousands, known to their captors simply as freight.
We were made to believe that we would be put into work camps. So we walked to the train station. When instead of being passenger cars, we realized it was cattle cars. But all delusions passed when the doors were shut, they were locked.
Everybody was scared because we didn't know what's going to happen. Where did they take us? There was no water to wash. There was no toilet facilities.
We spent 5 days and 5 nights in these cattle cars. Then several people died right in the cattle car, couldn't take it. We put them in a corner. The stank was unbelievable. Excrement, urine, death, hunger. The fear, the uncertainty. If they treat us like this, where are we going to be going? And then we arrived at that place. Somebody thought with a slit, Oswiecim, Auschwitz. Everybody raus, out. And the screaming and the yelling. Mothers looking for their children. Little children, boys or girls, separated. A mother trying to hold on to her baby. And the SS men with the whips and guns. I would have never believed anything like this can happen to human beings. There was a peculiar smell in the air. You couldn't figure out what it was. Sweet smell. You smelled it all over. I never smelled anything like it. This was not a labor camp.
Emblazoned on the gates of Auschwitz were the words Arbeit macht frei, work makes you free. Auschwitz was Nazi Germany's largest killing center, built on land confiscated from Jews. The huge complex consisted of 45 satellite camps that clustered around the central core. The buildings, low and nondescript, housed the thousands that arrived daily. When they arrived, those too weak, too young, or too old to be put to work went immediately to be killed, sometimes to the accompaniment of opera. The rest were deloused, disinfected, and branded with serial numbers.
We didn't have a name, we only had a number. You were called by a number. You marched out by, you were counted by a number.
They shaved our heads, and my mother was standing next to me. And when I looked at her, I didn't recognize her. She looked like an animal. And she looked at me, and I could see in her eyes, you know, the pain, seeing me. And then that's when we lost everything, really. Our pride, just everything. And we became practically animals fighting for our life.
The able-bodied were used as slave labor by the SS, which made money by leasing them to German companies. Work began at 6 a.m. They received a bowl of turnip soup at noon, a slice of bread in the evening.
The SS said, here you come in by the door and you leave by the chimney. And when you were too slow after an order, they said, but don't forget that the gas is waiting for you. Life was so hard that you practically forgot your family. I mean, things seemed so far away. Even those who fought to live didn't all survive. But those who gave up died.
We had to carry pipes and sacks of cement, and we were beaten by the SS. I was down to 90, 95 pounds, 85, I don't know. The normal food rations in Auschwitz were such that you had half a year, approximately, until your body gave out. Half a year. They figured it very scientifically.
The physical deterioration of slave laborers was monitored by the camp medical staff in a pseudo-scientific study of malnutrition. Other prisoners were subjected to medical experiments. This involved sterilization, castration, freezing. All inmates were examined regularly by SS doctors to decide when they were no longer useful.
The camp commander decides who should live and who should die. So you pass naked in front of those people, and they sit there with polished boots, riding grab in their hand. Your heart sort of stops, because to the right, you take your number and you know you're going to die, and if you go to the left, you live for another day.
6 weeks after she got off the train at Auschwitz, Alice Sylvester was selected.
One day, they ordered us for showers. They marched us in the room where we got undressed, completely naked. Then they took us in that room with the holes in the ceiling. So they told us to sit on the floor. There was no window. There was no air. So we started to first cough and then choke. And then, I don't know how long we were in, minutes or hours, I don't know. But then they started yelling out, everybody out. Now what happened, I say, is a miracle. Because that day, they had mechanical trouble. They could not let the gas through.
The gas chambers of Auschwitz rarely failed. Through vents in the ceiling, the SS dropped in pellets of an insecticide called Zyklon B. The lethal gas released from the pellets caused death in 15 minutes. After the poisonous air was pumped out, other prisoners were made to untangle the corpses. As many as 6,000 people could be killed in a single day.
Death to us was like breathing. I must have carried in my hands more bodies that I can even count by the thousands. And while every body that we took out was a human being, after a while, you became numb about it, totally numb.
The bodies were fed into huge ovens, but not before the gold was extracted from their teeth and their hair cut off to be used as mattress stuffing. Their ashes were used as fertilizer.
I cannot tell you why I was among those who lived and others by the thousands died. I can't explain it to you. But I told myself, some of us have to hang on in order to tell the story of what happened.
The Nazis' final solution destroyed 2/3 of Europe's Jews, 6 million men, women, and children. In Asia, the Second World War began in 1937 when Japan launched a full-scale attack on China. Like Germany, Japan was driven by the need for living space and by a racial ideology that had the Japanese believing they were superior to their neighbors. Japan's military leaders exploited the devotion of their people to help them wage a savage war throughout Asia. The war would cost more than 10 million lives and ultimately take Japan's own people to the brink of destruction. Japan, 1942. In wartime Japan, every boy was prepared to be a soldier. Japanese textbooks glorified war and taught children that their emperor was a deity. The Japanese people were told that they were superior and therefore invincible in this or any war.
In the 1930s, Japan's military leaders go back and they ransack the past and they pull out all these images of purity and sincerity and they pump them up into an ideology focusing on the emperor. We are a superior race because of our unique, pure qualities. And that's the equivalent to the Nazis pumping up master race theories in the 30s.
We believed in what the emperor called a holy war. We believed that we had a mission to achieve the so-called Hakuichu, meaning the 8 corners of the world under one roof, a world that would be ruled by our emperor.
For Japan, China would be the first step towards a Japanese empire in Asia. In December 1937, after capturing the provisional Chinese capital Nanjing, the Japanese soldiers went on a rampage against both defeated Chinese troops and civilians. Hiromichi Nagatomi, a Japanese student, was in Nanjing. He was invited by the army to join in.
The officer said, "Watch carefully." And he took out his sword, poured water over it, called one of the prisoners to step forward, and ordered him to stick his neck out. Then the officer chopped his head off. The head fell, and blood gushed from the arteries. Seeing this, the other Chinese soldiers ran into the river. Then I borrowed a rifle and shot one of them. That was the first murder I committed in China.
The Reverend John McGee, an American missionary, wrote to his wife about what he saw.
The horror of the last week is beyond anything I've experienced. I never dreamed that the Japanese soldiers were such savages. They've not only killed every prisoner they could find, but also a vast number of ordinary citizens of all ages. I did not imagine that such cruel people existed in the modern world.
Shiro Azuma kept a set of diaries during his tour of duty in Nanjing. Deeply repentant for what he had done, he was the first former Japanese soldier to come forward to tell what happened.
Whenever we found a girl, almost 100% of the time we raped her. Not just one of us, but 5 of us would rape her. And we always killed them afterwards. We simply set them on fire. We felt no guilt whatsoever. When we raped, we thought of them as humans, but afterwards, when we killed them, we thought of them as pigs.
In what came to be known as the Rape of Nanjing, the Japanese army killed nearly 200,000 civilians and raped an estimated 20,000 women. Japanese barbarism would spread all over China.
At this one place, I came across some mothers holding their children. There were about 20 women. I captured them and put them all in a house. I put logs inside the house, and I burned them all alive. The fact that I killed so many Chinese didn't even occur to me as a crime. I regarded myself as a hero. I had been loyal to the emperor and dutiful to my parents.
From China, Japan's warriors went on to conquer most of Southeast Asia. In every country, they brutalized, exploited, and enslaved the people under the banner of liberation and cooperation. But slowly, the tide began to turn. In mid-1942, the United States, having entered the war 6 months earlier, began to push the Japanese back.
The military controlled the press, and they didn't tell us the truth. And we are told that we are winning, but somehow it sensed we are not winning, you see.
As the Allied forces ground away at the Japanese military, fuel and food dwindled on the Japanese home front. Younger and younger children were sent to work in factories. United by slogans such as 100 million hearts beating as one, the Japanese people were called upon to make ever greater sacrifices to support a war against what they believed to be a decadent and savage and unforgiving enemy.
We were led to believe that Americans were too individualistic, and that kind of individualism should be destroyed.
Well, we had a saying that Yankee devils and British beasts or something like this. And, you know, being devils and beasts, and the Americans and the British must have horns and tails, and it must be very brutal, you see. That's our notion of our enemy.
For 2 years, Japan lost battle after battle. In June 1944, American forces invaded Saipan, only 1,500 miles from Tokyo. Obeying orders to fight to the last man, the Japanese troops were annihilated. Japanese civilians also refused to surrender, and some were ordered by the Japanese army to commit suicide.
The civilians on the island, they had been told that we were vicious, terrible people, that we would rape their women and murder them and so on. They were so convinced this was true that they finally got up to the cliffs on the north end of the island, and we saw them by the hundreds jumping into the ocean, to the rocks down below, carrying their children with them sometimes.
Japanese government reports praised the civilians on Saipan for cooperating with the army. Japanese newspapers glorified their deaths as sublime self-sacrifice. But by the summer of 1944, the Japanese military leadership had concluded that Japan could not win the war.
Then the Japanese government said, yes, indeed, and all the people, 100 million, must be ready to fight to the bitter end. And the Japanese phrase at the time was something called gyokusai, meaning a shattering of a jewel. It's a beautiful death. Now, crazy people, crazy militarists said, indeed, this is our honor. If we are all extinguished, so be it. For the average citizen, what choice did you have?
A command given by a military superior was to be regarded as a command given by the emperor. The emperor was to be regarded as a living god. We were supposed to die for him. We were not supposed to question his authority in any way at all.
Exploiting the mythology of sacrifice for the emperor and the nation, the Japanese military now turned suicide into a strategy. In October 1944, the Imperial Navy formed the first kamikaze unit. Young Japanese pilots would now fly one-way missions to death. Ralph Sakamoto trained as a kamikaze pilot.
Several of my classmates actually did go on a one-way mission. The members of the squadron who were not flying would line up alongside the airfield to wave off the aircraft which was taking off. I cried, I guess. prayed for them.
By April 1945, the war had finally arrived on Japan's doorstep. Okinawa, only 340 miles from the Japanese mainland. "1,900 kamikaze missions were unleashed. To defend the island, 15-year-old students were used as human landmines.
What we did was to carry a small mine on our back, dig a small hole in the field, hide, and when the noise was close enough, we were supposed to jump out and go under one of the caterpillars.
The Battle of Okinawa lasted for nearly 3 months. Many of the civilians hid in caves. Tomiko Higa was 6 years old. She was separated from her family and wandering alone. In one cave, an old couple made her a white flag and urged the child to surrender.
I begged them, Grandpa and Grandma, please don't chase me away. I want to die here.
She had been told that American soldiers would cut women and children into pieces.
When I came out, I saw American soldiers, and one of them was standing there with a black box. I thought right away that they were going to kill me with that thing. My father once said to me, even if you're about to be killed by an enemy soldier, don't die crying like a baby. Smile for the enemy when you die. So, thinking that that was it, I waved at them. But why does the soldier look so kind when he's about to kill someone?
The Japanese suffered a disastrous defeat at Okinawa. The Japanese High Command then issued orders for an all-out mobilization at home, a final desperate push to save the nation.
It's true that 100 million people are being mobilized and ready to perish, you see. Looking back, what a terrible, idea. Asking the whole population to perish for any cause, you see.
The Japanese High Command had planned that the Japanese army would be joined by virtually the entire civilian population to defend against the Americans on the beaches in the event of an invasion. The High Command had not anticipated an attack by air. In the course of the Second World War, all the main belligerents, including the United States, bombed civilians deliberately. During the Blitz of 1940 and 41, even as Britain denounced German barbarism, British leaders bombed Germany. At first, Royal Air Force planes bombed German military and industrial targets during daylight. But when they switched to night attacks so as to avoid losses, they found that the smallest visible target was often an entire town. In early 1942, the British Air Ministry instructed RAF Bomber Command to target, quote, the morale of the enemy civil population, unquote. This meant Germany's cities and Germany's civilians. That spring and summer, the Royal Air Force launched what it called 1,000-plane raids against Cologne, Essen, Bremen.
Now, the object of tonight's operation is to blot out the town of Bremen.
To introduce the man behind the 1,000-plane raids, Air Marshal Harris, CNC Bomber Commander.
Harris was quite confident that he was going to be able to win the war by using the kinds of methods that some people perhaps felt were not wholly moral because they involved such enormous casualties to civilians.
Air Marshal Harris continued to have the support of his government. In July 1943, Royal Air Force planes loaded with high explosive and incendiary bombs took off for Hamburg. Harris's objective? Total destruction.
There had been attacks before, but this surpassed everything. You could feel the impact of the bombs kilometers away. The roaring in the air was indescribable. The street where we lived was lined with tall linden trees, and they all bent towards the south.
They set a fire which became what is called a firestorm. And huge winds were created of hurricane force so that giant trees were torn by their roots and people were thrown into the fire. Huge convection currents are created by the heat, which intensifies the fire itself, so that temperatures reached 1,000 degrees centigrade, hot enough to melt pots and pans and things like that.
In 4 nights of bombing, the Royal Air Force destroyed 3/4 of the city, killed an estimated 45,000 civilians, and left nearly 1 million people homeless. The United States Air Force had helped the RAF in Hamburg, but had bombed only during daylight and targeted only military installations. On February the 3rd, 1945, American commanders abandoned their long-held policy of not targeting civilians. Nearly 1,000 American planes attacked Berlin. "25,000 Germans were killed.
This cruelty against civilians, in order to, as it was said, end the war as quickly as possible, that really was indescribably cruel. We didn't direct our anger at National Socialism, which had put us in this situation, but rather our anger was directed at the British and at the Americans for bringing civilians into the war like this.
11 days later, on February the 14th, the Allies joined forces to bomb Dresden, the cultural center of Germany. In 2 days and 1 night, they destroyed the heart of the city and left 50,000 people dead.
It was a great embarrassment to the people who were responsible. Winston Churchill altered the minutes that he was putting in the record to make it appear that he was less responsible. The Americans began to what we call cook the books, so as to make it appear that the kinds of things that happened there had not been done with the kind of intention that indeed they had been done with.
Having dealt a death blow to Nazi Germany, the United States now prepared its final assault on Japan. The aerial campaign began with the bombing of factories and military installations. In March 1945, Tokyo itself was selected as a target.
We received an astounding briefing that just took everybody by surprise. I remember distinctly that there was a loud, audible gasp that went up from the crew as they realized we were going into over Tokyo at 7,000 feet, not 27,000 feet. This is the most heavily defended city of Japan. We were carefully briefed with the full knowledge that the area to which we were assigned was in the densest part of Tokyo.
The planes were stripped of their guns so that they could carry the maximum bomb load of 10 tons. On the evening of March the 9th, 325 super fortresses arrived over the Japanese capital.
All of a sudden, the blast from airplanes came over like a roar. It shook the windows and made a sound. We all ran. From the west came a huge blanket of black smoke.
When we penetrated that cloud, we ran into these very strong odors that seemed like it had to be associated with a terrible tragedy. And I just describe it as the smell of death.
I saw my mother trip. Her hair stood on end and she screamed. Then she fell off the bridge into the black smoke with my baby brother strapped onto her back. I think she was trying to save my father, but he went down with her into the smoke.
After we dropped our bombs, I could look right down upon the city burning below us. It looked like a part of Tokyo had dropped down into hell that night.
In one night, American firebombs killed 80,000 civilians. Tokyo was only the beginning. 65 more Japanese cities would be bombed in this fashion. Japan was being pulverized.
It was only a few years earlier that Americans said, this is barbaric. Coming to the position that we must systematically bomb civilian populations to end the war, and that this is proper and appropriate and even moral, is an extraordinary moral and psychological journey, and in my view, a journey toward hell.
On August the 6th, 1945, one plane and one bomb over Hiroshima.
The entire town of Hiroshima was burning, and you can see the famous mushroom clouds. I've seen 500, 600 people burn, hurt. Some of them dead. A lot of people floating in the river. Some of them swimming, some of them dead.
Our main street was turned into a showcase of human cruelty. If the blast hit you directly, your eyes popped out. And people are walking around, holding their eyeballs like this.
Young children, it could be maybe first grade or kindergarten student. calling mommy, mommy, mommy. Then the teacher said, be patient, the mommy come after you. The next day morning, all the children dead. I still in here have a clear picture. It's such innocent little children.
I walked through the hell. I actually took a step through the hell and returned.
August the 9th, a second plane, a second bomb. Nagasaki. In the two atomic bomb attacks, nearly 200,000 Japanese were killed. On August the 15th, 1945, Japan surrendered unconditionally. The Second World War was finally over. In the last days of the war, victorious Allied soldiers arrived on a terrain that few could imagine or even had words to successfully describe. The enormity of Nazi atrocities demanded an accounting. At Nuremberg, once the scene of triumphant German pageantry, war crimes trials now made it clear to the world what Hitler had tried to accomplish.
The wrongs which we seek to condemn and punish have been so calculated, so malignant and so devastating, that civilization cannot tolerate their being ignored.
Ernest Michel, who survived the death camp at Auschwitz, covered the trials for a German newspaper.
Every day when I went into this trial, I looked at them sitting maybe 20, 30 feet away from me. And sometimes I had to stop myself, not jumping at them and yelling, "What did you do to me? To my family? To my friends?"
For the first time in history, national leaders were held responsible for their aggression. For the first time, the murder and enslavement of civilians for their political beliefs, their race or religion, was recognized as crimes against humanity.
You must plead guilty or not guilty.
Marie-Claude Vaillant-Couturier was called to testify in January 1946.
I tried to look at each of them, and I thought, look at me, because with my eyes and with my mouth, hundreds, thousands of your victims are accusing you.
On avait perfectionné le système. Au lieu de faire la sélection à la halte d'arrivée, une voie de garage menait le train presque jusqu'à la chambre à gaz.
Nuremberg was the first of more than a dozen trials in which Einsatzgruppe members, SS doctors, and others were made to answer for their crimes. In September 1946, 12 high-ranking Nazi officials were sentenced to death.
Convicted, the tribunal sentences you to death by hanging.
A similar proceeding in Tokyo tried 28 of Japan's highest-ranking leaders.
Ruthless killing of prisoners by shooting, decapitation, drowning, and other methods.
The Reverend John McGee was a witness.
The killing began immediately. Up to 30 soldiers together going about, each one seeming to have the power of life or death. And
accused Tojo Hideki.
In this case, 7 of those on trial were sentenced to death.
Sentences you to death by hanging.
More than 5,700 Japanese officers and soldiers stood trial throughout Asia. More than 900 of them were executed. In a Chinese court, Hiromichi Nagatomi, the student who joined in the Nanjing massacre, was confronted by one of his victims.
She said, "Nagatomi, you killed my only son, and you burned my only daughter to death." When their father came home and saw what happened to them, he lost his mind and died. I've suffered a sickness too. I got on my knees to apologize, but there was no way I could make up for what I did.
There would be no apology or restitution to the estimated 1 million German and Japanese civilians who perished in Allied bombing. Their deaths had become acceptable to those whose duty it was to end the war. It is hard to remember more than 50 years later, but when World War II began, victory for America and its allies was by no means assured. We'll discover that on the next episode of The Century, America's Time. I'm Peter Jennings. Thank you for joining us.